If you don't know me, my name's David Fish. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm also part of the teaching team. If it's your first time, we're so glad you're here. Welcome. We're really grateful that you would come and hang out with us this morning. We're in the midst of a series called Jesus and we've been trying to explore what the Bible says, what Jesus says about some of the more maybe polarizing and controversial topics of our time. It's been really fun. This morning, we get to talk about Jesus and technology. And I'm really excited about this, but I need to just give you a disclaimer about kind of the way this message is going to be broke down. For the first 20 minutes of this message, I am going to be the prophet of doom. And then for the last 20 minutes, we're going to look at what the Bible says, and it'll be hopeful and it'll be great. So I am going to stab the knife into all of us collectively and twist it for about 20 minutes, but then I promise I'll pull it out and we'll sanitize the wound and it'll be great, okay? It's going to be awesome. In 2016, I came across an article by a journalist named Andrew Sullivan, and the title of the article was, "I used to be a human being." I used to be a human being. And basically in this article, Sullivan talks about his experience of basically how he ended up one day at the equivalent of a digital rehab center. Basically, he describes the process leading up to him actually checking himself in basically for a detox from all of his devices. And he says some really interesting things. I just want to read a little bit of what he says in the article. He says this: "I tried reading books, but that skill now began to elude me. After a couple of pages, my fingers twitched for a keyboard. I tried meditation, but my mind bucked and bridled as I tried to still it. I got a steady workout routine, and it gave me the only relief I could measure for an hour or so a day. But over time, in this pervasive virtual world, the online clamor grew louder and louder. Although I spent hours each day alone and silent attached to a laptop, it felt as if I were in a constant, cacophonous crowd of words and images, sounds and ideas, emotions and tirades, a wind tunnel of deafening, deadening noise. I'd begun to fear that this new way of living was actually becoming a way of not living." And he says this: "If the internet killed you," I used to joke, "then I would be the first to find out." Years later, the joke was running thin. In the last year of my blogging life, my health began to give out. 4 bronchial infections in 12 months had become progressively harder to kick. Vacations, such as they were, had become mere opportunities for sleep. My dreams were filled with the snippets of code I used each day to update the site. My friendships had atrophied as my time away from the web dwindled. My doctor, dispensing one more course of antibiotics, finally laid it on the line: "Did you really survive HIV to die of the web?" And he ends with this. This is the quote I want you to get at the end. He says, "This new epidemic of distraction is our civilization's specific weakness. And its threat is not so much to our minds, even as they shapeshift under the pressure. The threat is to our souls. At this rate, if the noise does not relent, we might even forget we have any." When I read that article 3 or 4 years ago, it struck me as one of the most terrifyingly accurate descriptions of life in the digital age, life that you and I live each and every day. And I want to say from the top that technology has done lots of amazing things. Technology is not evil. We have, medical breakthroughs and all sorts of things, and extended human lifespan. There's all sorts of amazing things that have happened as the result of technological advancement. But there has also been a very, very real sense in which technology has overpromised and underdelivered. And I think the majority of people are waking up to that fact. If you think about people who lived, your great-great-great-grandparents or whatever, who lived, in the mid-1800s or early 1900s even, when you think about the way of life that they lived, they didn't have almost anything. They didn't have, a dishwasher. They didn't have a washing machine. They didn't have a dryer. Like, they were doing all sorts of tasks that we would say, take a bunch of time. And somehow when you think about that way of life, a part of you goes, I wish I had as much time as they had. Like, you think about it, here's, tech and gadget corporations, right? They've promised us for over a century now, that all of the things, the innovations, the technological breakthroughs, what it's gonna do is it's gonna save you tons of time, right? You can see this ad from, I think it's the 40s or 50s. Are you disgruntled? Good marketing guy gets a raise for that one. It says, don't be a dishwasher, buy one. Like having your own maid, a work-saving automatic dishwasher makes after-meal cleanup a breeze, saves you more than 4 hours every week. What have you been doing with that 4 hours, right? You have 4 hours that you're saving a week from having a dishwasher, right? Fast forward to 2023. You have a dishwasher, a microwave, an Instant Pot, and an air fryer, and 10 other cooking devices that you forgot that you bought. You deposit your checks online, you pay your bills on an app, you program your Roomba to vacuum your house for you, of course. You use Google Maps instead of asking for directions, you ask Siri instead of consulting a book, and you fly to New York in 3 hours instead of taking a train for 10 hours. So all of that means that you now have all the time in the world, right? All of that means that you now have 10 to 20 hours that you can spend unhurried, unbusy, rested, enjoying the presence of God, slowed down to life with your family each and every day, right? The one thing that's been promised to us from this ad all the way on is the one thing that constantly slips through our grasp, and it's time. And sure, we have less time for leisure and doing things we want. We have less time to spend with family, but the greatest tragedy is that we have less time than ever to deeply connect with God in prayer, in quiet, and in solitude. We have less time than ever for the deep work of spiritual formation, the slow work of discipleship where Jesus forms us into his image. And we have less time than ever to deeply encounter God in his word, to savor the scriptures the way that God longs for us to. The promise of technology to save us time has actually just gotten us addicted onto the hamster wheel of digital addiction. This is what Larry Dossey called time sickness. I've used this quote before, but I love it. In 1982, Larry Dossey, an American physician, coined the term time sickness to describe the obsessive belief that time is getting away, that there isn't enough of it, and that you must pedal faster and faster to keep up. Anyone? The problem is that our love of speed, our obsession with doing more and more in less time has gone too far. It has turned into an addiction, a kind of idolatry. Even when speed starts to backfire, we invoke the go faster gospel. Time sickness can also be a symptom of a deeper existential malaise. In the final stages before burnout, people often speed up to avoid confronting their unhappiness. The truth is that the very time we were supposedly supposed to save, that tech companies promised that we would save, has been eaten away by that very same technology. We experience life as an out-of-control freight train pulling us towards hurry, towards busyness, towards stress, towards exhaustion. So again, I'm not saying technology is bad. In fact, one of the things I want to start by saying is that technology is a tool, right? Technology is not inherently good. It's not inherently evil. It's a tool. However, we need to be really clear about what we mean by saying technology is a tool. A screwdriver is a tool, right? I might grab a screwdriver from my toolbox and give it to my daughter to play around with around the house and pretend that she's fixing something, right? Okay, so that's a tool. You know what else is a tool? A chainsaw. Now, is a chainsaw evil? No. But here's the thing. I need to know exactly what I'm doing when I'm using a chainsaw. I need to be careful about who I let use my chainsaw. I need to be careful about what boundaries I'm putting, if I'm wearing protective gear. In other words, they're both tools, but they're tools that that have different uses and they require different boundaries. So when we say technology is a tool, what we're not saying is it's whatever you want it to be. No, it's more like we've been told that technology is basically a screwdriver. That's fine. Just you got your phone in your pocket. It's helpful. You can call people and text people. It's not a big deal. Give one to your kids. Give one to your cat. Give one to your whatever. I don't know. And I think before we even begin, we're going to have to start by framing the discussion like this: that our phones and our digital technologies are a lot more like chainsaws than they are like screwdrivers. To give you one example of this, Sean Parker, who was one of the first presidents of Facebook. So somebody that would know quite a bit about digital technology and social media. He says this about the founding of Facebook. The thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever, and that's gonna get you to contribute more content, and that's gonna get you more likes and comments. It's a social validation feedback loop. Exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. This is the purpose, like from the beginning of Facebook, how do we take as much of your conscious attention in a day as possible? What's interesting is when you look at the lifestyles of the people who own these major tech companies and social media companies, you'll find that it's a little bit strange. For example, Steve Jobs famously never allowed his daughter to have an iPad. Numerous CEOs and presidents of social media companies do not allow their own children to use the apps that they develop. I read an article about this week. Many Silicon Valley tech executives pay extra money to send their children to device-free schools. And then many of these companies also employ neuropsychologists whose job is to study the physiology of the human brain and figure out how to exploit as many things in your brain as possible to keep you on the app. Reminds me of, we took a trip years ago, my whole family, to Costa Rica, and we were in a really rural part of the country, and we decided to have a little fun, and we went to rent some four-wheelers. And if you do anything in the US, if you rent from a company, four-wheelers, anything like that, there's gonna be like a list of waivers that you sign. And if you're in like a organized place, they'll probably make you wear a helmet and they'll do all these things, but you have to be this age, and right, it's gonna be really strict. We show up in Costa Rica, we're gonna rent these four-wheelers. I'm 14 years old, and the guy's like, have fun. Like just gives a 14-year-old this big four-wheeler, and we're not riding like over in the plains of Kansas. Like we're in like this hilly, mountainous, dangerous, treacherous territory, riding four-wheelers with no helmets, with no nothing, just like doing whatever we want. And there's a moment when I'm riding my four-wheeler and I'm driving probably faster than I should be, and I'm coming towards a curve. And on this curve, there's not like a beautiful railing or anything. It's basically just a sheer drop, like 150-foot drop or more than that probably. And so I'm just coming around and I'm driving, and all of a sudden, I begin to try to brake. I begin to try to slow down, and what happens is the brakes are not working, and not only are the brakes not working, the engine begins to rev. Like the engine begins to keep going. And I motioned my dad. My dad had actually gotten off his four-wheeler. We were coming towards a stop. And my dad comes over, and at this point, I've jumped off the four-wheeler, and I'm trying to hold it. My dad comes over. He's grabbing it. And finally, before it plummets off to its inevitable doom at the bottom of that, cliff face, we yank it over, and one of the tour guides comes over and helps us put it to a stop. Why do I tell you this story? What I find so interesting about this story is the 1 second it took to mark the shift between me driving the four-wheeler and the four-wheeler driving me. Like it was just like that. Like in one moment I was in control, and then in one moment that little device that I thought that I was wielding was now driving me straight off the cliff. So the question that we're gonna ask as we interrogate our use of technology this morning is, are you driving the four-wheeler? Or if you're really honest, is the four-wheeler driving you? Well, let's ask some of the questions. You knew the statistics were coming, so here they are. The typical cell phone user touches his or her phone 2,617 times every day. Now, the typical cell phone user, that's adjusted for all cell phone users, meaning these statistics are influenced by Great Aunt Mabel up in Wyoming who barely touches her phone. If you're a millennial or Gen Z in the room, the numbers are likely double. Sullivan says this again, a small but detailed 2015 study of young adults found that participants were using their phone 5 hours a day at 85 separate times. Most of these interactions were for less than 30 seconds, but they add up. Just as revealing, he adds at the end, the users weren't fully aware of how addicted they were. They thought that they picked up their phones half as much as they actually did. 47% of parents surveyed believe that their child has a smartphone addiction. Of the teachers surveyed, 67% noticed their students being negatively distracted by mobile devices, and the other 33% were just lying or not there for the survey, or I don't know. Of parents in the UK, 46% said they, quote, feel addicted to their mobile devices. Rather than in-person interaction, 33% of teens spend more time socializing with close friends online. Here's one of my favorites. 66% of the population show signs of nomophobia, the fear of being without your phone. I'm waiting for them to invent the scientific term for not being able to go to the bathroom without your phone, because many of you have that, and you know you do. And I don't. I just want to have my phone there. I don't need to. My personal favorite of all of them, 12% of smartphone users use their smartphone in the shower. Hold on, who are you? Like, identify yourself right now. I need to know, because the problem is I want to not believe it, but I believe it. Some of you are like, it's me, it's okay. Not in the shower, just take a small break, okay? Here's probably the most critical one. On average, people will spend 5 years and 4 months of their lifetimes on social media. That's not including you binging 7 seasons of whatever's on Netflix. That is only the major social media apps. And here's one this is the last one, I promise. While 58% of smartphone users have admitted trying to limit their device usage, only 41% succeeded in lessening their cell phone usage. And I hate to break it to you, and I feel this in my own life, but wanting to stop doing something and not being able to stop doing it is called addiction. It doesn't matter if it's Chick-fil-A. It doesn't matter if it's drinking something strong after work. It doesn't matter if it's touching your phone. If you want to stop doing something, but you feel incapable of stopping, that is addiction. You are no longer driving the four-wheeler. The four-wheeler is driving you. Now, combine this with the emerging research on loneliness. In 2022, the US Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health emergency. And there's all sorts of things I'd love to share from that, but here's one of the specific things in the Surgeon General report on loneliness. It says participants who reported using social media for more than 2 hours a day had about double the odds of reporting increased perceptions of social isolation compared to those who use social media for less than 30 minutes a day. So what this report uncovered was that in part, we're lonelier than ever because we're spending less time with one another because of our devices. But even worse, we're lonelier than ever because even when we're together, our hearts and our minds are not in the room. We've almost all experienced what it's like, in the words of the title of Sherry Turkle's amazing book, which is out on the research table. We've all experienced what it's like to be alone together. Turkle says this: digital connections offer the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Our networked life allows us to hide from each other, even as we are tethered to each other. So let's summarize. We're more connected than ever. We're more up to date than ever. We're more innovative than ever. And we're also more lonely than ever, more anxious than ever, and more stressed than ever. Okay, taking off prophet of doom cap, putting on hope Jesus cap, okay? So how do the life and the teachings and the way of Jesus and what we read in the scriptures, how does that enable us to live a different kind of life, to the life where the four-wheeler is driving us off the cliff? Well, I'm glad you asked. Thank you for asking that amazing question. Does the Bible even say anything about technology? Well, it doesn't take long. 11 chapters in, the focus is on human use of technology. 11 chapters into the book of Genesis, we have human beings using technological advancement, technological innovation as a means of kind of emancipating ourselves from God, from his law, from his rule, from his way. We call it the Tower of Babel, right? This is human beings innovating, coming up with brilliant new technologies. And as we gaze upon what it is that we've built and what it is we've done, we go, hey, I don't really need God. I can do it my own way. And then you fast forward in King David, when he begins his time as king of Israel, as he's trying to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to the nation of Israel, instead of honoring God's word and God's ways, God said that the Ark of the Covenant was only supposed to be held on the backs of the Levites. He instead copies a technological innovation invented by the Philistines, and a disaster ensues, if you ever have read that story. But really this morning, I want to leave you with one verse. And it's a verse that probably, if I were to guess, you've never heard someone preach on. And it's a harmless little verse nestled at the end of one of the shortest books in the Bible. And it's the very end of 2 John. Here's the way John ends his letter to the church. I have much to write to you, he says, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face, so that our joy may be complete. Here's what you need to understand about the period in which John is writing. John, in writing this letter to the church, is utilizing the most cutting edge technology that has ever existed in the history of the human race, and that's the Roman road. The only way that John or any of the writers of the New Testament can get their letters to all of these people, if you've ever read, John will eventually write to 7 churches of Revelation. Those churches are scattered across the Roman world. They would have been impossible, completely out of bounds, even just several years before John is writing. So John is making use, this would be like being able to send an email for the first time. That's how radical Roman roads transformed communication in the ancient world. And John gladly uses this technology, as do the rest of the writers of the New Testament. They're excited about this ability to write a letter and send it everywhere in the world. But notice what John says. He says, I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face. What's John saying? John's saying, listen, I have so much in my heart, and I have such a desire to communicate with you, to relate with you, but I recognize the limitations of this form of technology. And I'm not gonna ask this letter with paper and ink to give us something in our relationship that only face-to-face embodied interaction can give us. Like, think about how many people in this room have ever gotten hurt, gotten your feelings hurt by a text message or a work email or whatever. And when you finally got to talk to that person, they're like, oh no, I didn't mean it that way at all. And you actually you realize that you just interpreted their text or their email as hatred towards you as an individual because they left out a smiley face emoji, right? And the person's like, I wasn't mad at all. You're like, you weren't? Then why didn't you put 2 laughing emojis? Right, like what happens, it's impersonal, and so we frequently kind of get our wires crossed and we don't understand what the person's trying to say. How many of you who are married, I don't need a show of hands, have ever had a text fight with your spouse? You know, you click 2 times on the little shift key to get it into all caps, just like, and it's so funny because if somebody were to just look from the outside, it just looks like this. It's like, you never change, you're always this way, why do you, right? And then what happens, like, you get back together at some point and you work out in 30 seconds what it took you 2 hours of all caps texting to try to figure out. Why? Because you're running up against the limitations of impersonal technology, and this is what John is talking about. The reality of our life is that we have many digital followers, but very few deep, meaningful face-to-face friendships. And John knows better, so he says, I'm gonna use this technology to a point, but I'm not gonna ask this technology to produce a level of relationship and intimacy that can only happen when we're face-to-face. Because what does John say happens when we're face-to-face? Our joy is complete. So what that implies is as long as we remain digital avatars hiding behind a screen, that our joy is incomplete. So, with that said, as we recognize the Bible's approach to the limitations of technology. What are some things that we can do? I want to get really practical, and then we'll return kind of to the scriptures at the end, but I want to get really practical. What can we do to push back against the tides of digital distraction? I just have a few suggestions. Here's the first. We must recover solitude with God. We have to rediscover solitude and quiet before the Lord in the presence of God. Here's the way Jesus lived his life. Luke 5:15 and 16. Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. In other words, Jesus created a rhythm of life where he frequently disconnected from the world in order to be fully present to God. To put it another way, Jesus was not always on call. You can imagine Jesus out there. It says he withdrew to a lonely place. You can imagine Jesus, 2023, Jesus goes out to a lonely place to pray, and 45 seconds in to praying, his, the pocket of his robe vibrates, and he pulls out his phone, and he's like, sorry, Father, it's Peter. I got to take this. The fishes, the loaves thing, they haven't learned, and I'm going to have to go. I got to make something happen. There's hungry people, right? So he's sending a text, and then right? It's absurd, but that's the way most of our quiet time goes. We're in a silent room. You finally get 30 minutes away from your kids, and all of a sudden you're like, all right, God, and then what happens? Or even worse, it doesn't even vibrate, but you just feel that undeniable urge to just get it out. And the point of that phrase, lonely places, is a place where Jesus could not be reached, could not be messaged, and could not be distracted. We must rediscover what that looks like, and that means having a very, very clear relationship with our devices. 2, practice Sabbath rest. God has built into the fabric of the universe a 24-hour period of rest every 7 days. And it doesn't matter what your theology is behind that. I think if you would try it, if you would test that out with God for a while and say, listen, I'm gonna disconnect every 7 days at the end of the week. So what that looks like for me is I take my beautiful iPhone and I imprison it very high up in this cabinet. And I've learned, this is my trick. You ready for my thought process? Because I'm the chief of sinners, as Paul would say, when it comes to digital stuff. I put it really high up where I have to reach on my tippy toes so that I will look ridiculous if I try to get it. Like, so my wife, if she ever sees me she's like, seriously? You're that desperate for your phone? So that helps me. That's just a personal, take that for however useful it is. A 24-hour period of rest where we enjoy God's presence and we recalibrate after a work week. 3, prioritize face-to-face interactions. I know I promised you that no more stats. One more. Recent surveys report that 89% of Americans say that they interrupted their last social interaction to turn to their phones, and 82% say that the conversation suffered for it. Continuing, studies show that if 2 people are having lunch, a cell phone on the table steers the conversation to lighter subjects, and each party feels less invested in the other. It's not surprising. Each person in the conversation knows that with a phone on the landscape, you can be interrupted at any time. Turkle, elsewhere in this book, says, and I love this, she says, in the digital age, we have all become pausable. So in all of our reactions, you know and I know that you can pause me at any time and I can pause you at any time. So what do? When we're in face-to-face interactions, give someone the incredible gift of being uninterruptible. How deep could you go in a relationship? Think about a friendship, a relationship. If you knew that for an hour, for 45 minutes, for 30 minutes, you were uninterruptible. That there would be no vibrations, there would be no humming ringtones, there would be no, hold on just a second, let me check this. The gift of being uninterruptible. What prioritizing face-to-face interactions also means is show up to church. because there's something about the embodied gathering of God's people that cannot be replicated even with the best intentions of digital technology. And we love live stream and we love all of it, but it's a supplement. And I'm telling you, if you get in with your body and you're fully present, and by the way, that means while you're here, staying off your phone, because again, you can be present in body and in what Sherry Turkle said, you're still disconnected, right? It means prioritizing that gathering of God's people. Number 4, use technology with a purpose. That means know your why. When I pick up my phone, what is it exactly I want to do? What happens, right? Just being vulnerable here. I frequently just find myself taking out my phone and I don't know why I'm swiping the lock screen. Like I don't know, or at best, I have a vague idea that I need to check my emails and it's 45 minutes later and I've like downloaded some new game off the App Store and I'm like 4 levels in. And all of a sudden I'm like, what happened to me? Why? Because I didn't know my why when I picked up the phone. So it means, listen, when I'm gonna pick up my phone, I'm gonna know exactly what it is I'm doing and how long it's gonna take. And I might even share that info with somebody else so they can hold me accountable to that. What that also means for some of you is, some of you, you need to stop using the Bible app. And you need to buy a print Bible and you need to get away. Why? Because you click on the verse of the day and you read it and it's like, 1 John 4, brethren, let us love one another, for love is from God. That's so beautiful. Swipe, and then all of a sudden you're like, again, 40 minutes in, you're like on 5 different like levels of Candy Crush, and like you've bought 4 things on Pinterest, and like, you know what I'm saying? In other words, the phone has become a gateway, and the verse of the day is like a convenient portal that sucks you into the black hole of Silicon Valley, right? Some of you need to stop using the Bible app. You need to get a print Bible. This means turn off notifications for the majority of your applications. Why? Because the algorithms are designed to intentionally ping you with notifications so that you take your phone out of your pocket every 5 minutes. So in other words, what we want to do is we want to say, whenever I need to do something on my phone, I choose when that moment is, not the algorithms of Silicon Valley, right? So turn off your notifications on the majority of your apps. Number 5, invite friends and family to speak into this process. I used to end this message and say, go ask the Lord and figure out, what he wants you to do. No, I've learned. You can't be trusted. If you could be trusted, we wouldn't be having this chat right now. I want you to ask someone you trust. I want you to ask if you're in a marriage relationship, I want you to ask your spouse. If you have children, I want you to ask your children. And I want you to ask questions like this. Has my use of my phone ever made you feel devalued in our relationship? Has my use of my devices interrupted the fellowship and intimacy of our relationship? And then just sit there and take it in. Because the answers might not be what you want to hear. And you might have a litany of convenient excuses about work and all sorts of things. But the truth is, this is the time that we have to listen to people as they give input to how our use of technology has affected them in real and tangible ways. Number 6, create a rule of life. In other words, write down boundaries. I don't care if you're single. I don't care if you have kids, if you're in a marriage relationship. Write down, this is how we as a family are going to use technology. And if you're a parent, I would encourage you to read Andy Crouch's book that's out there in the back table in the lobby called Tech Wise Family. He lists a lot of different guidelines that they've lived by as a family. But one of the easiest ones is that he said, listen, as a family, we're all going to turn our devices off 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, and 1 week a year. Just an easy thing, 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, 1 week a year. So actually write down some boundaries, some guidelines. This is what we're gonna do as a family and live by it. Create an attention budget. You have a finite amount of money, so what do? You create a budget so that your money goes where you want it to go, right? Not disappearing in some unknown direction. You only have a finite amount of attention. So you need to budget your attention in many ways more intentionally than you budget your money. So that might mean actually trying to figure out in your daily life, how much direct attention do I have and what am I spending it on? And if that's out of balance, then you need to make adjustments. This is one final thing. I still love to use screen time apps. Like I feel like I've worked up to a decent level of self-control in some of these areas, but I still like when I'm working or when I'm really focusing and spending time with God, I really like an app that actually just stops me. Just says no, this far and no farther, right? So maybe you need to use some screen time apps. So as we end, let's go one layer deeper to the why. Here's the real why. Psalm 27:4. This is what David said. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. This is David, who is a king of an entire nation, who has military conquests and all sorts of domestic and foreign policy issues that he's gonna have to work out. He's living a busy life. He's living a complicated life. And as he thinks about the mission of his life, he sums it down into one thing. One thing have I desired of the Lord. And what are the two things he wants to do? To dwell in God's presence and to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. Both of those words, dwelling and gazing, carry the connotation of undivided focus and attention. He doesn't say, I wanna hang out in God's presence. He doesn't say like, I wanna occasionally spend some time with God. He says, I want to dwell in his presence, to remain undistracted, unhurried, unbusy. That's the mission of my life. Not to check into the hotel room of God's presence every once in a while. To dwell. This is what Jesus in John 15 called abiding in the vine. He said, abide in me. Don't just hang out with me. Don't make me pausable. Dwell. And then what's the next word? To gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. Not just look at God for 10 to 15 seconds and then go back to our 45th recipe video on TikTok of the day. To gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. In other words, our full attention gripped by the beauty and the majesty and the holiness of God. To dwell and to gaze. This is what's at stake with our use of technology. Our ability to dwell and our ability to gaze. Many of you probably know that earlier this year in February, there was a chapel service in Wilmore, Kentucky at Asbury University that turned into a multi-week long outpouring of God's Spirit and just a worship service that went day and night for over 2 weeks. And people began to flock to try to figure out what's going on. Is this revival? What is this? What's going on up in the middle of nowhere in Wilmore, Kentucky? And I texted my dad while all this was happening. And I said, Dad, I feel like we need to get up there because I'm so hungry for God. I'm so desperate for God. My dad was like, I feel the same way. We've got to get up and see what God's doing. And so we travel all the way up to Wilmore, Kentucky, driving in these country roads in the middle of nowhere. And we get to Hughes Auditorium, this old building with outdated carpet and pews and a giant pipe organ that says holiness unto the Lord on it. And you walk in the atmosphere and I'm enveloped immediately with like one of the deepest senses of God's manifest presence I've ever felt. And I begin to weep on my face on the floor of Hughes Auditorium. And as I begin to think about what's going on here, I look around and there's not one phone and there's not one device. And all throughout the Asbury outpouring, the leadership was saying, do not get your phone out. We're not streaming this. There was no lights, there was no cameras. There was one guy up there who knew maybe 4 chords at best on the guitar, and somebody singing over here. The sound system was going in and out. There was feedback, and yet God was present. And when I think about the why, what is it that was going on? Whether we call it revival, whether we call it an outpouring, here's what I know for certain. What it was an entire room, 1,000 people, simultaneously gazing upon the beauty of the Lord, undistracted, unhurried, every eye on Jesus, every phone put away, every screen extinguished, and God had the attention of an entire room. And you know what we called it? We called it revival. So what if God had the entire attention of every room meeting across the nation this Sunday? What if God had a people who learned to gaze again? Here's what the psalmist says in Psalm 119. This is his prayer. This is my prayer for you. Turn my eyes away from gazing at worthless things and revive me by your ways. This is the prayer of the psalmist. Turn my eyes away from worthless things. Notice he doesn't even say, turn my eyes away from evil things. He says, turn my eyes away from worthless things. The issue for so many of us is not even that we're gazing on evil and perversion and horrific things and we're giving our attention to that. It's that we give our attention to worthless things. It's not even just bad things. It's worthless things, emptiness, vanity. And the psalmist cries out with his heart, turn my eyes away from gazing at worthless things and revive me by your ways. The crisis of our hour is that we have lost our capacity to gaze. And so what the Lord would ask us this morning as we come to a close is this: where are you gazing? You are gazing at something. And it's either that you're gazing upon the beauty of the Lord, or what the psalmist says in Psalm 119, you're turning your gaze towards worthless things. I want to leave you with these words from John Mark Comer. He says this: there's more at stake with technology than our attention spans, because what you give your attention to is the person you become. Put another way, the mind is the portal to the soul, and what you fill your mind with will shape the trajectory of your character. In the end, your life is no more than the sum of what you gave your attention to. I'm gonna read that again. In the end, your life is no more than the sum of what you gave your attention to. Why don't you stand? I want to ask the prayer team to go ahead and come up. So here's the question as we leave. Have you lost your capacity to gaze? Where's your gaze this morning? Father, we thank you. Right now, as you just close your eyes, maybe just hold your hands out in front of you like you're receiving a gift, and let's just allow the Holy Spirit just to fill us right now. Come, Holy Spirit, we welcome you. Lord, turn our eyes away from worthless things. Would you capture the gaze of a generation once again? Would you captivate the eyes of a generation where our heads have been craned down staring at our screens? Would you cause our eyes to be lifted? Would we lift our eyes, as the psalmist said, to the mountains where our help comes from? Would we look up to you, Jesus? Would we be captured by your transcendent beauty once again? God, would we be captivated by a vision of your glory that provokes us to love you like never before, that provokes us to seek you like never before. Turn our eyes away from worthless things and revive us by your word. So as we leave this place, I pray for conversations. I pray for revelation. I pray for you to strike our hearts, Jesus, so that you would get the glory. So that you would get the glory. We love you. We worship you. We bless you. In Jesus' name, amen.